Now, weird fact about being here. I've only actually been here a handful of times, and only once actually into the club room. So, for a lot of people, you don't actually get to see it because you most likely just come and turn up to the games and stick around for a little bit and then head on home after. So, bit of an insight to this as well is the history behind some of these club rooms, some of the memorabilia left behind. Actually, not left behind, but memorabilia that's been acquired over the years. And just there's certain significance to things that I guess the general public don't get time or enough time to actually take in. So that's why the club historians down here today. So shout out to Ponsonby. We've got the logo in the background up there. Just gonna head on through and say hi to everyone. Yeah. And each. Young man, how are you?
Good, mate.
Hi, my name is Paul Neazor and I'm the historian at the Ponsonby Rugby Club. We're very proud of our history. It's tied us to the community for 150 years, and I've been asked to conduct a wee guided tour through the club room so you can see what we mean in the community and the pride that we have in our own achievements. So we'll go right back to the very earliest days, and we'll start on my right with a banner which you can see on the wall, and this was presented by the ladies of Ponsonby to the club's senior team in 1885. And in those days they used to meet at the post office and drive to their game in a horse-drawn open carriage, and this banner was designed that it could be put on a pole at the front, and that's the old club badge on it, and it would be visible as they were driving through the streets of Auckland going up to Epsom, because the main match ground by then was what is now Alexandra Park. Ooh. And so everybody could see the Ponsonby team and its banner as they drove through the streets of Auckland. The reason it stopped in 1891 is because the club competition was reorganised and it became a district competition in those days, and that meant that the boundaries were very strictly defined. If you lived in this particular area, you had to play for this club. And so the old Ponsonby Rugby Club people said, no, it's not the same club. And so the name changed to the Ponsonby District Rugby Football Club, and that banner was retired, but the ladies thought it was a great idea, so they made another one. And this one, you can see the club badge has changed just slightly, and this one covers 3 grades because the district scheme was for first 15, second 15s, third 15s. You can see the third 15 went pretty well at times, the second 15 also went well. The first had a bit of trouble because the strong team was City over the boundary, but one thing is missing on this banner, and it's 1909, which was the last year of the district scheme when Ponsonby won all 3 grades. And here is quite an interesting picture. Photo day of 1905, that's the old training shed in what was then Dignan Street. That's not the street you point share, but became Blake Street in the 1920s. And this is the Ponsonby senior team. You can see in the back of shot, banner, the championship banner for the district team. And you can also see the number of local people who came down to be a part of it, because the club was very much a part of the community. And in fact, the year before, there'd been a big gambling scandal had raged through Auckland Rugby, and the suggestion was that players were throwing games, and a couple of them got thrown out for life. It never came anywhere near Ponsonby, and that was a tribute to the management. The president had got into the players in 1903 and told them they owed their supporters more than they were giving them. So they pulled their fingers out. And this chap here is Dave Gallaher, who was to captain the All Blacks in Britain in 1905. But he became a legendary figure in New Zealand rugby. The Gallaher Shield is named after him, of course. and he's a member of the World Rugby Hall of Fame now, and there's a statue of him outside the North Stand at Eden Park. Very famous figure in Auckland rugby and New Zealand rugby. Up here, this is a photo of the last of the champions in the old club scheme, in the original club scheme, the 1891 team. Their date is on the banner, and they were a real power. But halfway through the season, one of the 4 clubs that was still going withdrew from the competition, and the district scheme was put in place because the club competition just wasn't working.
Wow.
And so that team got scattered far and wide. I think we had 3 of them left after the district boundaries came in, so we had to rebuild, and it took us a while to win a championship, and it was quite a while before Ponsonby became strong again. It didn't matter. We went through some dark times where, probably for the only time, the players didn't seem to care.
True.
But when they built the new training shed in 1901, the people of Ponsonby rallied round, and they provided most of the cost of it.
Yeah.
It was the biggest and best that the club could get, and that was when the players were told, the people provided this, you owe it to them to give your best every time. And the message sank in, and it hasn't had to be delivered at any time since. So that bond has been there for a long, long time. Yeah. And it's something that we at the club treasure, and there's an awful lot of people who grew up in Ponsonby also treasure.
In terms of club location, could you just give us a timeline of where it started? And because obviously we're at Western Springs now, could you give us a bit of a timeline of obviously where?
Sure. Until 1901, the club didn't have a home.
Ooh.
Because we were one of the few clubs that had more than one team. We used to hire various halls down in Ponsonby for the annual meeting or for any functions, but the club didn't warrant a big training shed, and it didn't have the money to buy one. So they got along, they borrowed facilities, and it didn't cost much to hire one of the big halls down in Ponsonby. There were a few. And so we had a good working relationship with a number of the organisations down there. 1901, they decided they needed a training shed. A lot of the clubs were building one at that point with an indoor training facility. So the club purchased a piece of land in what was then called Dignan Street, is now called Blake Street. Mm-hmm. And within a very short space of time, the building had been planned, built, painted by all the players. They came down and painted it, and it was ready to go in a matter of months. Mm-hmm. And that became our home. Mm-hmm. In the 1920s, there were 2 fires there. One of them was rather small and contained fairly quickly. The second one, which was only a couple of years later, was a bit bigger. The club rebuilt the room using the insurance claim, and it was quite fortunate that that happened because everybody else's club buildings were now 25 years old. They were starting to show signs of their age. Ours got a very comprehensive overhaul, and it went back to being the best in the city. We never had a match ground because we never needed one. Back in those days, all the games were played at Potter's Paddock, which became Alexandra Park, at the tram shed in Epsom. And the ground was owned by the Auckland Tramways. So the rugby union had an arrangement. They had 10 fields there. So everybody played there except North Shore. They were the only club who played at home. And until 1913, that was the arrangement. So Ponsonby never developed a match ground, but when they were thinking, oh, maybe we need a ground, there was no land and it was way too expensive, because in those days you didn't hire your hall out for functions. We did, but it wasn't a big money earner. But you had your players. You didn't have a social membership, for example, because you couldn't have a bar. And so the vice presidents put in more money than just about any other cause. And they were club supporters who had a bit in their pockets, and they got charged double the sum of the players, and the club would have 40 or 50 vice presidents. But that was pretty much the only income. except raffles and social functions, whatever. But the club wasn't rolling in money. So we stayed at Blake Street, and then the building got developed after the Second World War. It expanded in the 50s, it expanded some more. In 1964, they bought the property on one side, but they really wanted the other one as well, which they eventually bought, and it expanded and built a squash club there. And it was probably one of the 2 or 3 best club facilities in the country.
Yeah.
By the 1980s, it was becoming a bit of a millstone, because people will remember the old funny money days where interest was 25% per annum on loans, and
25%.
it could be worse than that too. It got up to about 29 at times. So if you owed anybody money, you were paying hand over fist. And we got to the point where the club rooms were basically swallowing all the income, the debt servicing. We had people defaulting, couldn't pay the bills. Well, that didn't help us very much. So by the early 90s, the club was looking for a new home. The plan was to go to Cox's Bay, but we ran into some unexpectedly aggressive opposition from the residents, and it became clear we couldn't go there. But also at the same time, the penny dropped. Moving from Blake Street to Cox's Bay was moving the debt from Ponsonby to Westmere. And so that was when we started looking at Western Springs. We did like the idea of a match ground, and there was a facility here that could be used as a bar and all the rest of it. Entered negotiations with the council. We had to sell Blake Street, which was eventually done to a consortium who have developed townhouses on the site. And we moved here in 1997, and we've been here for nearly 30 years. And apart from the floods in 2023, when we were homeless for 14 months, we've been here ever since. And it's quite nice for the old members who remember when we didn't have a stadium pitch to go out watch the seniors, or the Prams as they are now, or the women, and then come back inside and you walk straight to the club grounds. It's quite a nice arrangement. So that's a basic run through where we've been. We actually have had very few addresses. We've only had the 2 addresses in 125 years now.
Wow.
So the club has been very settled in Ponsonby, because of course that's who we are and we represent.
Cool. Thank you for that.
That's right. And over here, these are quite interesting. These are championship caps. And if you played in the team that won an Auckland championship in any grade, could be senior, could be 6th grade, at the end of the year, there was a presentation, and I think you probably had to play 5 games and you qualified for a cap. The various players won all these caps, and if you have a good look through, we've got 19, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Year after year after year, Ponsonby had multiple champions. And the president at the time was a chap named Thomas Atkin, and he reckoned his biggest thrill was handing out the caps to the champion team. So Mr. Atkin was the president from 1908 to 1945 when he died, and he handed out championship caps to no fewer than 65 teams during his term in office. And a lot of them have been donated to the club by the families or by the players. Some of them also include other unions, and there's some Auckland Rugby Union rep caps. But the thing about the caps, and you'll see the colours have faded in a few, but this one here, for example, it can be seen to be blue and black because the caps were in your club colours. So a blue and black cap meant you had won a championship in Ponsonby. And this cabinet is full of caps that we have. We have a display, some in the committee room, where there are 8 caps that come in one player's entire 8-year career. He won a championship every year he played. That looks...
do you have a name for that player? Or?
Yeah, Charlie Kamek.
There.
And
cool.
Charlie later became a very good coach as well, and he coached teams to 3 or 4 senior championships as well. But these things, the practice has died out. It died out in the 1930s, and it was one of those things that what the club does now is if you win a final to win a championship, you get to keep your match jersey. So last year we handed out 3 sets of match jerseys to the Premier Men, Premier Women and the under-21 men because they all won their championships, and the 23 players who were in the team got the jersey that they wore on finals day, and the guys who didn't play in the final, whether for injury or whatever, played sufficient games, got a jersey.
Yeah, cool.
And some of the guys will have a few.
Yeah.
Will, for example, will have 8, but that's not the most. Well, comes to that.
I remember, I think Joe was at AUT. I was still at high school, and he was delivering programs on behalf of AUT. And yeah, even then, I think that was almost like probably going on
Here in 2006.
Yeah, yes. That would have been around 2011, I think. So,
Okay.
so yeah.
Okay. This cabinet here is full of a lot of very memorable items, all from our international players, and from period between 1905 and 1938. I'll take you through some of it. The medals up there are from a variety of events, but most of them came from the 1905 All Black Tour, and several were presented to Dave Gallaher, who was the captain, and he was, as the captain, he was treated with a deal of respect. There's one after the Welsh Test, the famous Welsh Test that the All Blacks lost 3-0, and the medal is engraved on the back, presented to Dave Gallaher. There's another one from the France Test in 1906, which was Gallagher's last test and France's first, and again that's suitably inscribed. He was made the free man of a few towns as he went, and others were presented to various players on that tour, and there's inscriptions on the back what they were. Coming down, we see All Black caps, and this practice has just been reinstated, but back in the day when you made the All Blacks and you played your first game, you got a cap. Didn't have a number on it, they didn't have player numbers in those days, just had the years. And all our All Blacks from between the wars have donated their All Black caps to Ponsonby. So they're all here. Special mention are the 1938 and the plain cap. They belong to a chap named Bill Carson, who was killed in the Second World War. Bill is one of 7 double All Blacks, so he played for New Zealand at cricket as well. And the plain cap is his New Zealand cricket cap, and the rugby cap is his 1938 All Black cap. There's a blazer pocket here that belonged to George Gillett, who was on the 1905 All Black tour. We've actually got memorabilia from all 4 members who were on that tour. We've got Gallagher's medals and other things. We've got George Nicholson's jersey. We've got George's blazer pocket and a touch judge flag. And Bill Cunningham presented a silver cigarette case, which is down there on the bottom. And it's engraved with his name. And you're looking at that. Most of the players smoked in those days, but look at the size of the smokes they smoked. They weren't particularly big, were they? So, another one here, Dougie McGregor's cap and his 1913 All Black diary. They gave them a wee diary. They played 16 matches in California and Canada, and they won them all by massive scores. And Dougie, as a winger, had a bit of a field day. He scored plenty of tries. But down here at the back, you'll see a couple of really threadbare old caps, and there's a great story with those. We had a memorabilia expert from Australia came over, and I showed them to him. He said, "Oh God, they're the worst I've ever seen." I disagree. I think they're the best because they belong to a guy named Sid Riley, and Sid played for Ponsonby, but in the late 1890s, money was a bit hard. And the family had a furniture business where they imported a lot of furniture from Australia. So both Sid and his brother Ollie were sent over to work in the family business. Ollie played for New South Wales in 1894, toured New Zealand, and there is memorabilia of his in that cupboard as well. But Sid played one match for Australia in 1903, and it was the first test the All Blacks ever played. But he's playing against New Zealand. And then, not long after that, he came back and he resumed his football career, but he had been involved in the murmurings about being paid for broken time, so you went out of pocket. He played rugby league, and he got one game for New Zealand at rugby league in 1912. He played against South Auckland. And in later life, grandparents might know this story, he had a newspaper agency up on Ponsonby Road, and he'd tell people he played football for Australia and New Zealand, and they all thought, oh, the old bugger's making this up. Nobody took him seriously. He was doing no more than telling the truth. He actually had played one game for Australia and one game for New Zealand. To get back to his caps, we have his New South Wales cap and his Australia cap. And they're both as threadbare as you can imagine, and they're worn, and the gloss has been taken off them and all the rest of it. What I'm sure happened was Sid would put them on, because the peak is frayed down to the cardboard, and sort of put them on. He loved those caps. He was so proud of them. You could tell that by the way he told people he'd played for Australia and New Zealand. I reckon he would have put those caps on almost every night of his life and just had a look, oh, yeah, this is my cap. And that's how they got so worn. But the Aussie guy and a restoration expert both have said to us, oh, you need to work on those caps. I don't think we do, because they are something that somebody treasured, and the kindest thing he could have done for them was look after them and love them the way he did. So the club is going to make no moves to restore them. They will stay in the condition that we got them in, because there's a reason they became in that condition. They weren't put in a drawer and tucked away out of sight, out of mind. They were very much a part of his life.
Born with pride.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I think, means more to us than having a nice, shiny looking cap.
Yeah. It's cool. And the other caps,
Yep.
are those with his family still, or?
No, he left us all three that he...
Okay.
There wasn't one for a New Zealand league team in those days.
Yeah.
Unless you played a test match. Of course, he played a tour game, not a test match. So while we had a lot of players go to rugby league out of this club, I would imagine you'd look to the Ponsonby Rugby League Club, where a lot of them went, because that was where they finished their football. Dougie McGregor was one, and we have his rugby memorabilia, but not his rugby league memorabilia. We do have a couple of medals from Charlie Savoury, who was a guy who changed codes in 1910 and later became very prominent in New Zealand for a lot of reasons. But amongst other things, the report of his death from Gallipoli, he was a soldier who was killed at Gallipoli, became such a talking point that the way that death reporting from the battlefield was done was changed, because there were stories, he was wounded and he's recovered and all the rest of it. He'd been dead for weeks at that point, 7 weeks, but his next of kin, who was his brother, was the last report they had, he'd been wounded and he was still alive. It wasn't the case, but he was so well known because he was New Zealand heavyweight boxing champion. He played for New Zealand at rugby league. He was a monster of a guy. He was about 6'5", and he would have been 120 kilos, which is a big man now, but back in those days it was a giant. And all the soldiers knew it. And of course, because he was the boxing champion and everything else, he was easy to recognise. It's quite a long and involved story. It's actually on the rugby club website, the story of Charlie Savoury, because he was an interesting character, and I don't think I would have liked to have played against him, because he seemed to have the white line fevers. But he could do a lot of things, and he actually made very specific instructions in his will. Who got this cap, who got this medal, all the rest of it. And a copy of that will was discovered by Ron Polensky, the journalist in Dunedin. And Ron wrote a very nice piece about certainly his last 6 months.
Mm.
And that's been reproduced in full on the club website, along with what he was at the Ponsonby Rugby Club. And there's photos of him still exist. And a very interesting character.
Cool.
But he was very well known to the people of Ponsonby, it's a fact. And anybody who's interested, go on and have a look.
So what was the website again?
It's ponsonbyrugby.co.nz, and then on the bar there's our club, and under our club there's our history and our honours. And it's been taken right back, and every newspaper story concerning the club up to 1945, which is the latest papers past has got, has been linked to the website. And there's profiles of leading players and All Blacks and our 100 gamers and our life members and our champion teams. And there's an awful lot about the club history there. It's not quite complete, but it's getting very close, because 1874 was a long way to go back into the past to start. But anybody who's interested, you'll find a lot of stuff about the club there. And it shows how it's developed really from a group of guys who knew each other and met to play in the Domain, which was what they did to the start, to where we are now. It doesn't ignore the hard times, and it has a lot of good times to celebrate as well. So feel free to go there. That's what it's for.
Cool.
Especially if you think you might have had relatives who played at the club at some time in the past, dad or granddad or whatever, because if they did, the chances are you will find something about them on the site.
Cool. Yeah.